Hi everyone, welcome to the second episode in the DevTools Diaries podcast series. Today I am joined by the wonderful Bryan Ross, who I will go ahead and let introduce himself and his career so far.
Hello, folks. How are we all doing? Thank you so much for having me on today. So my name is Bryan Ross. I am based in sunny Scotland, as you can probably guess from the accent. I am a field CTO or exec advisor at VMware Tanzu. So my job is to go out and help businesses understand how to get the best from technology. And I know one or two things about that because I've been in various management positions throughout my life in engineering. So I've been there, got the scars, and lost all the hair from my head as a result. So more than happy to help organizations just understand how to mix people with process and a little bit of tech.
Absolutely spot on. And yeah, super excited to have a bit more of a conversation with you about that as well. So let's get into it, right? Currently working in a business which is really focused on helping to make DevOps teams' life easier. What is it about like that space that attracted you initially out of curiosity?
So for me, I think I've always been doing DevOpsy type things. So I started my life in sysadmin, and I moved into management mostly by accident. Somebody had to lead, and I was going to say ambitious, not the right word. I was probably too stubborn to wait for anyone else to do it. So, and yeah, I think with me, especially with against my management style, I just think that we should treat people well, and that's kind of the way I manage. How would I like to be as an engineer, and work that way? And that's usually all things we look for, which is like honesty, transparency, respect, and a good helping of humility.
Makes sense, right? We all like openness, transparency, and absolutely humility as well. And me and you have spoken quite a lot about like trends that we tend to see in, I guess, dev tooling businesses, right? Any businesses that are making products to make engineers' lives easier. Like, what have you seen in the space over the past few years? And do you have any predictions for 2024?
Oh well, I never do predictions because they always end out terribly, right? That'll be our snippet on a TikTok at some stage. Um, Without doubt, I think the big thing that we've discovered in Dev Ops tooling is that it has historically been all about tooling and a little bit of trying to bring teams together. We've gone through the pain and suffering of trying to do that at scale, and now we see the importance of things like developer experience, developer productivity, and platform engineering come to the forefront. And I think all of those are a shift away from tooling and more towards the human aspect of these tools. Who's consuming them? What effect does it have on their working lives? And fundamentally, like we know deep down that happy people do better work. So what can we do to make them happy?
Yeah, I love that. And I think that aligns quite a lot to what we've probably seen in the tech market over the past 12
Mm.
to 18 months as well. Businesses knuckling down, potentially having less resources, but still needing the same amount of productivity and happiness. And I guess a question I hear from a lot of people is, can we use tools to supplement the loss of workload or the loss of folk who you're working with? Or should we just be focusing on the people and people happiness? Probably a mix of both, I think.
Yeah, so look, without doubt, in terms of predictions, like we know that artificial intelligence is going to play an important part. And right now, the developers I speak to are already using things like GitHub and GitLab and their co-pilots to help them code. I think that's really important as well for junior members of staff because those AIs, although they're not brilliant at writing code at the moment, they're really good for explaining code. And one of the other elements is that idea of helping collaboration. That's where I think AI can really help. And that's maybe where we get a little bit of productivity increase as well. So, if, for example, a security engineer wants to understand what's changed in a block of code, they're not going to read 150 comments in a version repository system, but AI could perhaps summarize that for them. Or likewise, developers may not really know too much about security. So when they see a vulnerability, it's difficult to follow how bad is this? whereas AI can then come and say, right, well, as a developer, this is what it looks like, this is why it's bad. Also, here's how you might be able to fix it. So, there's things there that can definitely help. But without doubt, and I want to be really clear, there is no way forwards unless there is good management. And if you are losing good people, I think it's much more important that you look at your managers and look at the environments you're building rather than trying to invest your way out of that problem.
Yeah, good point. So use tools to help and support growth and productivity. But yeah, management is the most important thing. So let's focus on that, right? um, you've been managing teams from like 100 to 150 people, right? What do you think the most important traits are to create that positive environment and positive and productive and, let's say, DevOps culture of
Mm.
continuous improvement and development?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's a few things. I think without doubt, it's about setting up the right environment for learning. So we know that the tools and skills that we have today are not going to be the tools and skills we use tomorrow. So that's why it's really important that we hire for people that have a growth mindset, and then we give them all of the right ingredients within that team to help them grow. So that is things like setting really clear goals around what you want to achieve, and as a manager, leading by example about how you want to try and get there. I think that you want to provide a really safe place, like a safe environment for people to explore those ideas, innovate, grow their own personal skills, and make mistakes along the way. I think one of the lessons I learned very early on in my career when I was a co founder in a small startup was that when you've got the right people around you and you make a mistake, you learn from it rather than feeling horrible about it. Well, still felt horrible about it at the time, but the team got me through that, right? Um, and then also as well, it's about recognizing and rewarding people. So how can we let people know that the work they're doing today is impactful and that it matters to something? I think that's what we all generally want. And I think maybe that's part of the respect for one another too, is understanding that everyone is here to try and do their best work. And although they may have a different perspective from us, they're still trying to make something happen. They're trying to get something working in their place. So it's not that developers don't care about security, it's they just really want to get that feature out. That's what they're interested in. And security people don't want to slow everything down. They just want to make sure we don't cripple the company financially if we have a mistake. So that kind of understanding each other. And I suppose the two underlying things is trying to just inspire people to stretch a little further. So, we know what we're doing today. What's the next set of tools? What's the next skills we need? How do we grow? Is it presenting skills? Is it going to conferences? Is it joining communities or doing some work in open source communities, for example? Um, and then tied with that, perhaps the most controversial, is that I think good managers open doors for the future. So some of the best managers I've worked with have been the ones that have worked to get me promoted either to their same level or above, or help me find jobs in other companies. And I've certainly done that too. I think the best thing that can possibly happen for you is that when you've managed to grow someone all the way through and they've got to a point where they now need a different environment in order to go further. And from my own personal perspective, Scotland's a small enough country that we all end up working together again anyway. So, yeah, I think that's the key thing: like continuous growth mindsets, and just respecting one another and working together well.
Love those points, especially what you say about your network being quite small, right? You never know who you might run into in the path in the future from your past, and literally like the introductions that can be made. I believe as well, like your job as your manager is to make the people who you work with better than you. And if you identify that you can't give them any more growth anymore, then who can you introduce them to that's going to support them? And that's that growth mindset piece, forever and ever developing yourself and other folk. And I think the most like successful businesses that you see will hire great people who all have a specific skill set and are better than them as well. So it makes tons of sense to me. Um, Something you mentioned as well was really having a plan on how you want to grow, which I
Mm.
think is awesome. And I think when you've been in your role for a little while, it's probably quite easy for you to put that in place. Okay, these are the options for me. I know where I can go to get there. What would you say if there are folk who are like just entering the tech industry, or maybe they're
Mm.
career changers? They naturally will have some sort of interest, right? Because they've got to that place right now. But how can they come up with a plan that's like realistic and achievable for themselves to be able to grow? Like, what advice would you give on that side of the coin?
Well, I think the best thing, first and foremost, is those people are generally going to be curious about something. And I maybe it's just because I'm, immature, but I think that childlike curiosity about the world and wanting to work out how something works is a really strong motivator. We sit at our desks for 10 hours a day. We should probably enjoy the things we're doing, and I think curiosity is a good way of doing that. So if I was changing career or starting something new, um, I think getting involved with the community is probably the fastest and easiest way. Um, from my own experiences, I think imposter syndrome can take a lot of people. So everyone assumes they don't really know much because they don't think they do. So they don't have anything to share and to a community or offer a community. But in actual fact, there's always a series of people behind you waiting for someone to help them throw a ladder down. So no matter how much you don't think you know more than that, and you can help someone else. And in the process of helping someone else, that's going to help you too. Um, Likewise, if you join a community, even if you're doing simple things, if it's a coding job you want to get into, join a join an open source project and help them with documentation. That's a really good way of understanding where the product sits and how it's helping people, working through examples. That's good value. Then you could start working with maybe bugs and then working out how to submit good bugs, getting involved in the community, building a bit of a name. You get on a Slack call with them at some stage, and then you're building that network. And if you're in roles, I think it's the same thing. You are probably working with the same people every day. You should try and expand your network a little, whether that's inside your company and understanding how different teams work, or whether it's out at conferences and rather than perhaps doing all the sessions, spending more time in the corridor chats. For me personally, I think one of the best things I've done in my career was to offer a chap in finance an hour of free cloud training in return for an hour of finance training, and I learned a lot about how the business really works underneath the skin and what happens with all these spreadsheets at the end of the day. That was then a catapult for me to then use in other parts and understand either how to get funding or how to charge for things or just generally why some things are happening. And likewise for him, it meant that when he was looking through these costs and line items, all of a sudden he could make sense of what was public cloud versus private cloud, or what is software as a service versus platform as a service. As a finance trained person, all these things aren't obvious. So again, it's a really good example of even the basics are what you can help other people with.
That's such a good example, right? And I think people be surprised how willing other people are to have a conversation and to help other people. And I've had a lot of conversations with people, like by running a lot of like technical events, people being like, I'm really worried to come, I might not know anything, or I don't want to speak up. But actually there are thousands of people like that, and if we don't all put ourselves outside of our comfort zone a little bit, it links to that growth mindset part, you're not going to grow and realize what the actual reality is as well. So, yeah, really good points. I like that. And yeah, community networking, you never know what that could bring in the future. So, it makes so much sense. Um,
Sharing yourself is scary, but it's definitely worthwhile doing. Like any presentation, your first one is going to be horrible and gut wrenching, probably.
yeah,
Sorry, there's no way around it.
yeah,
But with some practice, you get used to it.
yeah.
But no one's going to notice or care. The fact of the matter is, you had the courage to stand up and share. I've had the same. I've been in the IT career, helping teams and everyone else for years and years and years. It's only recently I've started writing on a regular basis and publishing that. That felt scary because I was talking about things I thought were too basic. But in actual fact, there's been some great engagement around that because it's the practical advice of how, for example, change management works and how you can build it as part of your developer experience. Like, why does change have to be a bad thing? How do we understand what their perspectives are so we can all work better together? These are things that I think people have actually resonated with
Yeah.
because developers might not know too much about why change managers are so particular, for example.
Yeah.
What their jobs roles look like when things go bad.
Yeah. Links just knowledge just helps that understanding even more, even if you think it's basic. Actually, the more we understand about one another, the better environments we're going to have an understanding and the more success we'll have. So it makes sense. um, Something that I wanted to go back on is just what you mentioned around um, having like a high performing team and an open culture, and something that we really focused a little bit upon was blameless culture as well.
Mm.
Do you want to give a couple of points about your experiences in terms of blameless culture, why you think it's important, and how people can ensure that they implement this as well?
So again, this comes back to this lesson I learned very early on. So back at the beginning of my career, there was a small group of us that got together and started a company, um, and I made a mistake. I wrote some code that spammed all of our customers. And as a young company, I thought I'd just single handedly killed the company because our customers were receiving 20, 30, 40, 50 copies of a marketing email. And it's not a good look. And I stared there at my keyboard, and it was my work colleagues that came round, and they were all focused on how we solve the problem, not on what I did wrong. And I remember as well, we had a graphics designer. He couldn't really help us with the code or what to do with the business side. And he came across and he said, I'll put the kettle on. And that is what a blameless culture looks like. We fixed the problem. We then chatted about what went wrong. It was a rookie mistake with a global variable. So we learned an important lesson that day. But ever since then, I have found that, first of all, that story to really work in hiring because it's my biggest mistake or the one that hit me the most. I've made bigger comically since then, but that's the one that hit me the most. And I find that when I'm hiring, when I ask people their biggest mistakes, and I can soon detect whether they've got humility. And I think that's where blameless cultures come in. We all make mistakes. It's just whether we're going to help each other fix it or not. And if you're in a team where you can't make mistakes, you're not going to learn. You're not going to grow. So I think from a management perspective, it's vital that we're able to have a blameless world.
Funny story. Always need to put the kettle on. That'll make everything better. But no, it's an important point, right? People aren't going to trust one another if you don't think you can make mistakes. Just the cohesion within the team as well. Like, don't dwell on it. It is what it is. What can you do now apart from solve the problem? Let's move on. So,
Yeah.
super
And
important.
that's the same with ideas as well. If you've got an idea or you think something's going to go wrong, then you need to feel safe in that environment that although you're perhaps having an argument or a debate about how something should work, like there's a way forward, there's a way for you to express your voice, your concerns, for that to be processed and dealt with so that everyone can move forward. Again, there is no point in you knowing that something's going to go bad, not saying anything for whatever reason, and then lo and behold, everything goes bad.
Mhm.
I told you so is never a good look.
No, no. And it leads really nicely to the next topic, right? Inclusivity,
Mm.
psychologically safe spaces, and diversity of thought. So important. Diversity of thought, first and foremostly, but being in an environment where you feel safe to give your opinion and it is going to be heard and you are going to be able to come up with solutions together as well. So, yeah, let's move on to D and I a little bit as well.